Now, I'm going to start this video out by briefly taking a look at and giving my thoughts on the new characters that Lucasfilm just unveiled for the upcoming Project Aluminous, before then addressing some of the complaints, concerns, or whatever else you'd like to call them that some fans are raising after this reveal. Because right or wrong, true or not, they feel that once again the focus is on bringing us more quote-unquote strong female characters, and that the story, or Star Wars itself at this point, is just a vehicle to push an agenda. And my intent will be to step back and maybe take a look at why it is some are frustrated with Lucasfilm, or why they feel this way, as well as to look at it a bit from the other side as well. And if you'd like to skip to the start of that discussion, I'll include a timestamp in the comments below. Okay, so first of all here, if you don't know what Project Aluminous is, it's this large-scale publication effort from Lucasfilm that will tell one large interconnected story that spans multiple books and comics, and only books and comics, and will be set in what's called the High Republic era, which is roughly 200 years before the prequel trilogy. Furthermore, we've been told that this is considered a golden age for the Jedi and Republic, and during this time they'll be expanding into the Outer Rim territories, and the Jedi are sort of acting as Texas Rangers on the frontier, their words, not mine, where they'll encounter a new enemy called the Nihil or Nil, who are like space Vikings. Again, their words, not mine. And so just the other day, as I mentioned at the top, we were introduced to a few of the Jedi that we'll be following during the story. And before looking at them, let me just say that I think it's a good idea for Lucasfilm to explore a new or different time period altogether, to sort of create their own unique Star Wars independent of pretty much anything else done before. A case could be made that they should explore the Old Republic time period, but if they did that now and it didn't live up to what had previously been done, or they changed it too much, or whatever else it might be, you'd have a lot of disappointed fans, on top of all the disappointed fans you have thanks to the sequel trilogy. Anyway, since there's a good chance you've watched other videos by now that have gone over these new characters and listened to them read the little blurbs about them, or you've just read them yourself, I'm not going to waste your time and read them all again. I'll put each of the 5 new characters on screen in turn, and if you haven't read about them yet and you want to, you can of course pause the video and do that yourself. Okay, so I'll say this, that in general, I sort of like the very regal, I guess you could say, look of their outfits here. Another term that's been used to describe these Jedi during this time period is Knights of the Round Table, and they do sort of give off a bit of a medieval vibe. The problem with them, though, is the same problem I basically have with the whole idea or concept here, which is that it's set so closely, relatively speaking, to the prequel era Jedi and their simple earth tone attire that I'm wondering what changes. What's going to happen that the Order will be so different in 200 years? How do they go from, if you read the descriptions of them here, these completely self-sacrificing paragons of good, to the more aloof, self-righteous Jedi we see in the prequels, who are completely blind to the dark side right under their nose? And so instead of being interested just in the time period itself and these characters, as I talked about in another video, I'm far more curious to see what ultimately goes wrong for them than I am in just seeing this time period as its own thing or a separate story. And speaking of the clothing style again, I know some of you will quickly say that 200 years is a very long time, and if you look at the real world, just 20 years ago people were dressing very different than they even are today, and that's all well and good and true, but the Jedi have been around for 1,000 generations. I'd like to believe that they haven't gone changing their look every few years on a whim in that time period. Anyway, to avoid this wanting to see what goes wrong to line up with the prequels mindset that I have, I personally think it would have made more sense to go back further than 200 years, to maybe shortly after Darth Bane goes off into hiding and starts the Rule of Two, and the Jedi are, or they think they are at least, free from the Sith for the first time in a very long time, and then see how they respond to that, what they do without their arch nemesis around. Or they could have set it a couple hundred years after that, after the start of the Rule of Two and the disappearance of the Sith, which would be like 700 or 800 years before the prequels, so it's really in no way connected to what we'll, again, relatively speaking, see in the prequels. Also, it doesn't make much sense to me that the Sith have been gone for 800 years, and only now are the Jedi and Republic expanding out into the Outer Rim. Another thing I'm not overly fond of are the names of these new characters. I mean, Loden Greatstorm? Who came up with that one? It sounds like the name of a dwarf or a giant or some other type of fantasy race character, not something out of Star Wars. The other names are better, but they still don't really scream Star Wars to me. I guess they're really trying to go for that medieval time period feeling, and so they're using names that kind of go back to that. As for these Jedi characters themselves, or the little bit we learn about them here, well, the older three sound good and boring, which makes sense because the perfect Jedi would be pretty virtuous and boring, and the interesting part about characters like this is usually how they deal with adversity, or the evils of the world, or galaxy in this case, and how it doesn't or does change them. The younger two, who are both newly knighted, both seem to be rather unsure of themselves. Which I can understand in one respect, since these books and comics will be for people of all ages, and of course you'll have some Jedi in there that the young can really relate to, but it doesn't make much sense beyond that, considering I don't know if you'd really be knighting Jedi who are unsure of themselves or have a lot of self-doubt. But again, for the sake of the story and the target audience of those books, I'm guessing, it's fine and it's not something I'm going to take issue with. All that said, and here's where we kind of veer a bit to the other topic, what some have taken issue with or couldn't help but notice is that the best of the best Jedi of this time period is a woman, which has led some to already or automatically declare this woke SJW garbage and all of that, which is unfortunate. Not because I think it looks fantastic and they're going to miss out on a great story. In my honest opinion, this looks okay and like it has potential, yet I do have some serious doubts about it. What's unfortunate is that we've gotten to the point where the first assumption many will make when seeing something like this is it has to have an agenda behind it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily saying it doesn't in this case, or that they don't have a good reason to feel that way, because I would be stunned if it wasn't a very conscious decision to make the best of the best Jedi a woman, which is part of the problem that has come about lately. For many fans, these stories don't feel organic anymore. Like decisions are made just off of what works best for the story, but instead they're made because of a message someone wants to get across. As I basically said at the start, many now feel that their beloved franchises have become propaganda and either have no interest in continuing to watch or read it, or they'll express their concerns and want to see it returned back to the way it was, which of course gets interpreted as them flat out rejecting the message or what's being pushed, which in this case is more and stronger women being introduced into Star Wars, when that's not what they're saying. They're not against more women in Star Wars. They're against this message being more important than the story. And maybe the craziest or most ironic part about all of this is if this Project Aluminous had somehow come out, maybe 7 or more years ago, back before what many will call the SJW movement really kicked into gear, or at least started to notice it. Anyway, had this come out several years back now, I don't think too many fans bat an eye at these characters, have an issue with them, or think twice about a woman being the best of the best. And I know some will want to run to the comments to already tell me how wrong I am, but hear me out first. Let's try to talk plainly about this and look at it as logically as we can. Anyway, as I've talked about in other videos, the Force, as far as we know, picks people at random and seems to give them varying degrees of power. So in theory, there's a 50-50 chance that the most powerful Jedi at any given time would be a woman. Any fan who knows and understands the lore around this, and especially those who read the expanded universe and have seen many powerful female Jedi and Sith and other characters, understands and is fine with this. You'd be very hard-pressed to find anyone complain about such characters as Mara Jade, Jaina Solo, Mitra Surik, Darth Traya, and so on, all of which were very powerful women. So what gives? What's changed? Why do men not have a problem with those characters, but do with Rey, or look at these new female Jedi in the High Republic era and already want to roll their eyes? And how can some male fans absolutely love a character like Ahsoka, but hate a character like Rey? It doesn't compute to simply say they hate all women and don't want strong female Star Wars characters when they've loved previous ones, and Ahsoka is a fan favorite of many. And the simple and honest answer, and I really should just be able to end the video by saying this, not that it even needs to be said at all, it should be obvious, is they feel Ahsoka is a way better character than Rey, that she was handled better and has a fantastic story, whereas Rey did not. But the problem is that Rey and other strong female characters that have come about recently are completely above reproach. If you're a man and you have anything to say against them, it must be because you can't tolerate strong female characters and you hate women. Not that you just don't like that character, or there aren't male characters you don't like in Star Wars as well. And though Anakin is now a favorite of many, back when Hayden Christensen first played him in the prequels, he got a lot of flack, and no one ever thought it had anything to do with anything other than how the character itself was written and or Hayden's performance. And if it's perfectly fine to critique a male character and the actor who played him, it's only fair to be able to critique a female character and the actress who plays her without automatically assuming it has anything to do with anything more than the character itself or the performance of the actress. And go figure, but when you accuse men of just hating women or not wanting them in their quote-unquote Star Wars, many of them will want to defend themselves against the accusations. And I can tell you firsthand that the more you try to make a reasonable and logical case against a character like Rey simply being a bad character because you're not being believed or taken at face value, the more some people think you're just trying to justify or defend your misogyny. It really is an endless loop and a nearly impossible battle to win, because some people are just going to believe whatever they want to believe. For whatever reason, they want to make assumptions and make enemies of anyone who doesn't think exactly as they do. There's also this strange belief that the strong female character is something completely new to what you might consider more male-geared shows, movies, or entertainment in general. And I'm not sure what world these people grew up in, but I can tell you that in nearly everything I watched growing up, there were always strong female characters. For example, Star Wars is my favorite thing all time ever. I grew up watching it continuously, and it had Leia, one of the best characters ever created in anything ever. In my favorite cartoons, there were always characters like Teela and He-Man. G.I. Joe had Lady J and Scarlet. Thundercats had Chitara. Voltron, one of my favorites back in the day, had Princess Allura, who stepped up and became a part of the team and flew one of the lions. A lot of those shows also had great, strong female villains as well. In the comic books I read, like X-Men, there were always great and powerful female characters, and a lot of them were stronger than their male counterparts, and I never thought twice about it. And I know some of you will now want to point out that in most of these examples, there weren't many women and they were never the main characters. But most of these examples were aimed primarily at boys, but that didn't stop them from including female characters. And though I can only speak for myself, I never had a problem with their inclusion. I always liked the female characters as much as the male characters. Again, I never really thought twice about it. And this is where some of you will say that subconsciously I've been trained my whole life or brainwashed to believe that girls should be side or background characters in boys' stories. When if you watch these shows or movies or read the comics, the female characters are just as much a part of the story as the male characters. They're on par with the male characters. There just weren't as many of them in most cases. And go figure, but boys wanted to watch a show where male characters were the main or more predominant characters. And go ahead and tell me that's problematic, and I'll point out that one of the main reasons given for pushing more quote-unquote strong female characters and more female characters in general is because girls supposedly can't relate to male characters in these franchises or franchises like Star Wars. In other words, it's okay for the women or girls to not be able to relate to male characters or something more geared towards men, but if men or boys can't relate to the female characters or don't want to watch something that is made up predominantly of female characters, that's not okay. They're being sexist. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say we need to include more female characters so girls can relate, and then get mad if a boy says they can't relate to more female characters. You can't say girls couldn't relate to Luke Skywalker, which Kathleen Kennedy, the president of Lucasfilm, did, and then get angry if boys perhaps don't relate to Rey. Again, you can't hold boys or men to different standards of acceptance if you truly want things to be fair and equal for all. And the simple truth here, and this is likely to rile some people up, is that not everything has to be for everybody. There's nothing wrong with a show, movie, franchise, or whatever else it might be that appeals more to one group of people than another. If more boys like a franchise like Star Wars, that shouldn't be looked at as a problem that needs fixing. And sure, I can certainly understand that Disney wants to broaden the audience to make more money. If you really want to know what this push to include more women is all about, well, maybe look no further than that. And setting that aside even, I can also agree that it can and should be more accessible to girls because I don't think it should just be for boys, and girls and women should be encouraged to embrace genres like sci-fi and fantasy because they're fantastic and they're great outlets for the imagination. But that still doesn't mean it's problematic for more boys to like Star Wars than girls. The same way it's not problematic if more girls like a franchise like Twilight, for example, and I know some girls will probably cringe at that example. And the fun part there is, as far as I can tell from someone on the outside looking in, is that one of the main premises is that two strong male characters are fighting over a female character. But perhaps funner still would be flipping the roles there and wondering if anyone would be interested in reading a story or watching a movie where two strong women fought over a weaker man. Anyway, my point here is that when women or girls enjoy something more than boys or men, that's not only not a problem, it's usually celebrated or considered a good thing. If you make a movie just for women, you're a hero. If you make one just for men, you're a villain. And any man who might have anything to say about something primarily for girls or women is told it wasn't made for you and to essentially shut up. But if I told a woman that Star Wars wasn't made for you, which I would never do, I'd be ceaselessly attacked for it, even though George Lucas himself once said where his original target audience was 12-year-old boys. Though let's be real, he, unwittingly or not, created something that can and does appeal to damn near anyone. And no, to be clear, this here isn't in any way meant to be a call for less female characters in Star Wars or for it to cater only to male fans. This is a call to let people like what they want to like and dislike what they don't want without being accused of being a horrible person. This is a call for creators to make whatever they want, the way they want, aimed at whatever audience they want, and then to let the consumer decide, good or bad, without being judged. And I think if we're being completely honest, we'll all agree that, all things considered equal, on average, boys and men seem to be more attracted to fantasy or sci-fi genres than women or girls, though the aforementioned Twilight is proof that when something out there that's considered fantasy, I suppose, is tailored more towards women or girls, they'll certainly get into it. And there certainly are a ton of female Star Wars fans, and have been since day one of the franchise. So it's certainly not a hard and fast rule that women won't usually like this sort of thing, nor is there anything wrong with women or girls that do love this as much as their male counterparts. In fact, I personally think it's awesome to see women love Star Wars and other similar properties. Hell, my sister was a huge Star Wars fan growing up, and still is. I still go to see all the new movies with her. My fiance loves Star Wars and all things fantasy and science fiction, and every day of my life I am so very thankful and grateful to have met a woman like her. And both of them will tell you that growing up, there was a stigma around girls who liked these sort of things, that like Star Wars or science fiction or fantasy or whatever else it might be, and they're happy to see that things are changing and it's becoming more acceptable for girls to openly enjoy these genres. So I certainly think there has been some good to come about due to this push for more female characters in things like Star Wars and so on. It's great that girls can embrace geek culture with less judgment these days. But right or wrong, the harder it's pushed, the more accepted it's expected or demanded to be without these characters being introduced, being able to be fairly critiqued, and the less pushback of any kind that is tolerated, the more men, and certainly in some cases women, are going to get frustrated by all this. And they're becoming more and more vocal, as we've seen in recent years. And go ahead and say who cares if men are upset by any or all of this. They deserve it, or worse yet, be happy about it. And then take a look in the mirror and you'll see someone who is part of the problem, not solution. Because people interested in actual peace or solutions will look at and try to understand where the other side is coming from, and that certainly goes both ways here. While people only interested in winning a war will just look for ways to crush their enemies. And I'm not saying there are simple solutions here. I'm only saying there will never be peace if one side just calls the other a bunch of toxic, sexist man-babies if they have any concerns at all, while the other side starts to insist any inclusion of a strong female character has to be part of an agenda. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to either tell me what you think about these new characters from the High Republic era that I talked about way back at the beginning of the video, or to tell me what you think about what I said here in the later half. And go ahead, call me a woman-hating man-baby or something like that. Those are always my fiance's favorite comments. She really gets a kick out of them. Either way, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.